Welcome to the concept of agile leadership. I'm Dr. Prabhakar Gantasala, Associate Dean, School of Business, Southern Connecticut State University. I'm happy to introduce to you the topic of agile leadership. Moving on, we'll begin with the learning objectives. When you're done with this particular module, you should be able to understand the core concepts and principles of agile leadership. I'll provide you with an introduction to the evolution of leadership approaches, very short discussion on trait theories of leadership versus behavioral leadership theories. I'll introduce to you the concepts and principles of agile leadership and principles to an environment that is categorized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, called as the VUCA challenges. So obviously we understand as business students or as enrollees of the micro-credential or as practitioners in the areas of business, we also understand that we are dealing with an environment that's extremely volatile, pretty uncertain, because we are not the only business that exists out there. We operate in societies, we operate with various stakeholders, and we also operate under the guise of compliance with government agencies and regulatory bodies. And in a very complex, turbulent kind of business environment, we have volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So we'll have a discussion on each of those as we progress, and we'll have a lot of examples that I would be happy to share in support of the discussions. We start with the definition of agile leadership, and before we get there, we want to understand the difference between traditional leadership versus agile leadership. Now, traditional leadership is more based on command and control, a very hierarchical structure, extreme planning, going very granular with what has to be done, who should be doing it, whom are you supposed to be reporting your work to, what are the tasks and responsibilities, and a very clear definition of who is in command and who is in control and who has the responsibility and the obligation to perform certain set of activities and duties. So that's a very traditional way of looking at leadership. Now, whereas agile leadership is defined by being very adaptive, is very supportive and collaborative in terms of creating teams, creating the tapestry that's required between teams. So we have team building, intergroup team building, and also we are making sure that these teams interact in very synergistic ways and work iteratively towards achieving a goal. So that is what is agile leadership in its basic definition, that it supports adaptive ways of doing things, it supports collaborative ways of organizing work, it builds on team building and the collaboration between teams, and progressively they achieve the goals that are supposed to be achieved. The core elements of agile leadership are customer centricity. Every business operates under the understanding that they understand customers. So customer needs, customer requirements, customer wants, and creating minimum viable products, focusing on customer service, including after sales service. That becomes the driving force of agile leadership. As customers change their needs and wants and their expectations alter from time to time, including their tastes and preferences and lifestyles, agile leadership ensures that organizations create products and services that match customer expectations and far exceed customer expectations. So, customer centricity is the core element of agile leadership. Iterative progress. So, agile leaders are not going to be satisfied with achieving certain set of objectives or targets or goals, but they always raise the benchmark, create new set of goals, have a vision that is long term, and that vision is broken down into goals that could be organizational goals, team goals, individual goals, and that progress is measured by the kind of impact that is being created by teamwork, individual contributions, and how these entities work towards one another and towards achieving those goals. One of the core elements, again, as I just mentioned, is team empowerment. Agile leaders focus a lot more effort in creating the right set of teams, picking up team members that have common inclinations, have the common capacities, have the common motivations to achieve something. And these teams are created in ways that have common goals, a shared vision, and members have complementary skills. They can support one another and towards holding one another responsible, both individually and as teams, towards achieving certain objectives, and those that can be measured in terms of impact, quality, and the scope and scale of impact that these teamworks are able to generate. An example in support of what I've been talking in terms of the definition of agile leadership is the transformation of Microsoft under the CEO Satya Nadella. His leadership can be classified as, denoting all the core elements that we talked under agile leadership. Is being truly transformational, showcases empathy, supports collaboration, has inculcated a growth mindset among all their employees and stakeholders, and there's a lot of transparency and open communication in terms of vision, policies, and how they get the job done, and how are they able to be more customer centric, achieve goals in ways that are collaborative. They've shifted from a know it all perspective under Satya Nadella to learn it all culture. What is very important in agile leadership is to be able to create that culture. It's not to think that I know it all or a few people know it all and nobody else matters in the larger scheme of things. Satya Nadella's transformative leadership or agile leadership has moved Microsoft culture from assuming that we know it all and we understand it because we have been in business for so long to moving towards learn it all. Can we understand customers? Can we understand how technologies are changing? Can we understand what's happening in the market space? Can we understand and learn from best practices elsewhere? Can Microsoft understand how competition is working and how things might have to evolve? That is the focus and on basis on which Satya Nadella has been able to transform Microsoft's culture using his agile leadership. And to that effect, the kind of impact that Satya Nadella has created at Microsoft is that market capital growth from $300 billion dollars in 2014 to $2 trillion dollars plus in 2023. That's a massive one measure of impact, and it's what matters to most organizations is how they're able to translate all the cultural changes, all that visionary changes into something that's tangible, that positively affects people, planet, and the bottom line as well. I have a recommended video that I would suggest strongly for you to watch. It is Satya Nadella on Microsoft's transformation, and that's available on the YouTube channel. You can go watch it for free. It reiterates a lot more detail on Satya Nadella's approach as the CEO of Microsoft and focusing on customer centricity, on focusing on iterative progress, creative teamwork, and building on collaboration, supporting open and transparent communication, and having made that kind of impact in Microsoft's culture and towards realizing one or more than one impact points for Microsoft. Moving on, we are focusing now on what I just introduced at the beginning of this particular module that we'll be also discussing principles of agile leadership. One very important aspect of agile leadership is servant leadership. I mean, history has shown us, like, for example, Nelson Mandela, who exhibited a lot of servant leadership qualities, serving others and understanding, people's pain points and making sure that they're based on certain values and principles of equity, dignity for individuals, understanding values that are eternal, like freedom, independence, respect. Nelson Mandela could inspire an entire country and an entire generation of people towards achieving what Nelson Mandela, as the president of South Africa, could achieve. So, servant leadership is the ability to support team growth, understanding that we are social animals as human beings, and as employees, we would like to work not in isolation, not in silos, but in very close, cohesive teams, and the ability to support building these teams, keeping that cohesion, and also positively inducing these teams in ways that they are more productive that they enjoy working is what is an integral aspect of servant leadership. And servant leadership is a very important tenet and principle for agile leadership. And agile leadership is also based on servant leadership that believes in removing obstacles. So a servant is somebody who actually clears off the obstacles, creates a pathway for every individual and also teams to be able to pursue an objective that seemingly is very difficult. And they're very smart at configuring teams in ways that they can achieve these goals. They can also spot the obstacles, and agile leaders can remove these obstacles by creating the supportive climate, by generating the kind of resources that are required, by creating the tapestry and the collaboration that's required between teams towards achieving team goals, organizational goals, departmental goals. An example here would be that of Southwest Airlines leadership model that again is very employee centric. Happy employees can serve better, can understand customers better, are that much more friendly, accommodating, welcoming. So they are pretty much employee centric. Southwest Airlines ensures that their employees are happy. They create a strong positive culture, which is based on empowerment. So Southwest Airlines ensures that employees are empowered, they're trained, they're having the kind of skill sets and competencies required to do their job really well. And again, Southwest Airlines leadership model is based on servant leadership because there's plenty of humility that managers and leaders at every level exhibit towards their employees, towards stakeholders, towards customers. And again, as I discussed in the previous slide, there's plenty of open communication regarding objectives, goals for employees, about how they need to care for customers, of how to make sure that they leverage the training opportunities to upskill themselves from time to time, to leverage the kind of resources that Southwest Airlines provides, and open communications on performance and feedback so that employees are aware if they're on target, on course to achieving the targets and goals that have been set forth as KPIs, and also open communication regarding feedback so that they are aware of what kind of changes should they be making towards achieving those goals. Another very important principle of agile leadership is empirical process and control. Now, almost always you have to understand that everything that we do in business is having a process. That applies to agile leadership as well. Transparency, inspection, adaptation become integral to the empirical process control. How do you ensure that employees, your followers, if you're an agile leader, that they are able to trust you, believe in you, and are happy to work on goals that have been commonly agreed? They can only do that based on the principles and tenets of transparency. So communication has to be trustworthy. There should be transparency in what has been decided, what has been communicated in terms of not just communication, but also in terms of practice. Inspection has to be there, validation has to be there, so that any action or any decision is based on validations and evidences, adaptation because the business world changes. There's a lot of uncertainty, volatility, ambiguity, and therefore adaptation is a very critical path towards achieving customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, and ensuring that goals are achieved on a timely basis. So the process control happens in terms of transparency, maintaining transparency, creating those observations and inspections so that you have the right validations. And from time to time, you're able to make those adaptations that are required. That's a very important element of agile leadership. Also, you have to understand that value driven delivery is an important tenet and principle of agile leadership. Focus on creating customer value. Like, for example, you're taking this micro credential on agile leadership. My focus should be on trying to create some value for you. If you took this micro credential with me, what's the value? What's you know, the takeaway from taking this micro credential? Are you able to reflect back on your own leadership style? Are you able to reflect back on what you do at the workplace? And if you can, then there is value creation, value addition from taking this micro credential with me. So every organization that has agile leaders or making sure that they focus on creating customer value. Because a customer pays a price, you want to make sure the value far exceeds the price that they pay for a particular product or service. And that also means that you need to have quick feedback loops. Talk to your customer, understand how they feel about your product or service. What are the pain points do they have? What are the key features that are missing on the product or service? What iterative improvements can be made in the user interface of using a product? What after sales service would they, you know, want to add onto the product or service? It's very important that you create these feedback loops, not just with customers, as I just mentioned, with also say suppliers, with other stakeholders, other vendors, maybe compliance officers. You have to create this as many possible quick feedback loops so that you add value to every element when you're making a particular product, when you're manufacturing a product, or when you're designing a service. You have to add value at every element of the value chain. Now, value chain is another topic of discussion. Probably I will bring that up in one of the other modules as I talk. But every organization is involved in a value chain where you draw from raw materials, where you have a process of manufacturing or assembly, you create a finished product, you package it, you take orders, you transport the product itself, you deliver and install the product, and after the product has been sold or installed, you make sure you provide the warranties, the guarantees, and the after sales service. That's where you're creating value in the choice of raw material, in the manufacturing process, in creating a finished product, in supporting installation, and ensuring that they have proper support after sales as well. So every step of the value chain, you have to make sure that the focus remains on creating value. And how do you do that? Because you talk to customers, you talk to your production engineers, design engineers, you talk to your suppliers of raw material, you talk to vendors, ensuring safety and high quality of the raw materials that go into manufacturing a finished product. A wonderful example of Amazon's leadership towards value driven delivery is between having ownership and accountability, customer obsession, bias for action, respectful disagreement, and efficiency. So Amazon ensures that they own whatever they're doing, whatever they offer, they're accountable, they're customer obsessed, they make sure they're tracking what customers prefer in terms of products or services. They have a bias for action. They make quick changes to the products that are available and how they make these things available for them. And they have respectful disagreement in terms of how they can actually roll out these changes. And they're efficient in reaching out to customers, talking to their stakeholders, creating those quick feedback loops, and ensuring they continue to focus on creating additional customer value. I would strongly recommend for you to watch a video on servant leadership in action by Ken Blanchard on YouTube. It's available for public consumption. It's a great source for you to revisit servant leadership. So, servant leadership definitely supports team growth, removes obstacles, creates the empirical process control based on transparency, inspection, and adaptation, always having a focus on customer value and creating a feedback loop so that the improvement process is a continuous one. Evolution of leadership styles, because we are focused on agile leadership, it's important that we actually talk a little bit on historical progression of where leadership styles began and how they've evolved over a period of time. Command and control was the focus of leadership styles in the early 1900s. So, for example, Ford Motor Company under Henry Ford believed strongly on command and control. A military style hierarchy was there in place. Exactly, people knew what was supposed to be done. The product specifications, as Ford was manufacturing cars, was very clear. They knew it was having a clear protocol in terms of time and motion study. The focus was on efficiency and productivity because, again, going back to command and control, you're making sure that employees are as productive as possible, can put as many components together, can assemble as many cars as possible in the shortest period of time. And that was how Ford operated. And it was pretty efficient. It was extremely effective in terms of how things happened in those environments where they were very predictable, customer choices were limited, and you didn't have too much of a competition, and therefore Ford Motor Company under Henry Ford could follow command and control to great effect. Not so much as things evolved in the 1920s and 1930s, where research and researchers and people from the industry and academics did more and more research to figure out what leadership styles were most effective. And then the evolution happened towards understanding human relations. And the greatest experiment towards that effect was the Hawthorne studies. So in 1920s, early 1920s to late 1920s and early 1930s, there were several Hawthorne experiments that were done. One very familiar, most popular experiment was based on light intensity. So workers at the workplace were told that they were being observed, and an experiment was being conducted, which was obviously the Hawthorne experiment, and the light intensity at the shop floor was being changed. So the experimenters or the researchers wanted to find out what would happen to the productivity of employees if the light intensity was reduced or increased. So, I mean, common sense would tell us that shop floor workers would require a decent level of light intensity to carry on their job, to be productive, and to be able to generate productive, products without error, without defects. But what surprised the researchers was that when light intensity was reduced, the productivity actually increased because these group of employees were told that they were being observed, that an experiment was being done, and because something novel was being done right away, these workers felt that they were being observed, they were part of something special. And in spite of the light intensity being reduced to that of moonlight intensity, their productivity kept on increasing. That was pretty startling that human relations are way beyond just command and control. They're not like any other machine, but they actually operate with emotions, feelings, attitudes, and therefore they're much more complex than what people might think. So the Hawthorne studies opened an entire area of discussions and the advent of organizational behavior because human beings and human relations were pretty much more complex. Like in the Hawthorne experiment, even though the light intensity was reduced to that of moonlight, the productivity kept on increasing. To me, that was the starting point of where, you know, human beings were being respected for what they bring, not just a set of skills to be able to put cars together to assemble components or create products, but also that they bring in their attitudes, their motivation, they bring in their own personalities, their feelings and emotions play a part, and therefore the focus shifted not just only from time and motion study and the military style hierarchy and command and control towards having more emphasis towards human relations. In the 1970s, the third point here is transformational leadership. At IBM, Lou Gerstner did his own experiments to figure out that empowering employees was important to make them more productive. It was important that employees feel that they're empowered in terms of having the right set of skills, they had the competencies to do a great job, that this was extremely transformational. If you trained employees, if you upskilled them, if you made them feel they were being recognized, they had growth opportunities both professionally as individually, they actually could produce more, they could be more effective, more efficient. Prioritizing customer needs was extremely important as competition grew, and IBM figured this out very quickly that they had to prioritize customer needs, and in doing so, they can create transformational organization, serve clientele better, and create value for customers that they would want to come back and be repeat customers or could stay loyal to IBM. Open communication was emphasized at IBM, which was pretty transformational because employees felt part of the organization. Customers felt that they were taken care because of open communication. The resulting effect of such a transformational leadership style being followed at IBM was significant turnarounds in terms of how strong IBM was in terms of business, in terms of creating innovative products, in terms of serving customers better, and having employees who are much more job satisfied. IBM could also focus on creating the change management required to transition quickly and in face of competition. So that was in the 1970s. Now, fast forward to 2000s and even currently, right now, agile leadership is what is in fashion. That's why we're talking something called as agile leadership. The best examples that can be discussed here is Spotify's squad model. The squad model that Spotify actually created was they created plenty of squads, and each squad could focus on one very creative thing. It could be on engineering, it could be on design elements, it could be on Kanban, or it could be Scrum. Each of these squads could have their own focus, both long term as well as short term, tied to organizational goals, to Spotify's goals. And they had that kind of autonomy and empowerment. They operated as teams. That's why they're called squads. They had this band mentality of being extremely creative, thinking outside the box, and that's actually contributed to Spotify's success. And this comes through thinking outside the box in terms of being empowering, in building teams and collaborations, and having that kind of transparency that we earlier discussed. Another great example here is Netflix culture of freedom and responsibility. So again, here you go. The cultural factor is extremely important. If Netflix is so successful today as a streaming organization that we all watch Netflix continuously, is because they have been able to generate a lot of creative services and content based on a culture that stems from freedom, responsibility, and of course, hiring top talent. This is what agile leadership is: understanding the market space, studying competition, thinking outside the box, being extremely creative and innovative, supporting collaboration, supporting teamwork, empowering employees as well as teams, hiring top talent that can make this happen, building a strong culture that works for the organization. This is the result of agile leadership. You and me can be agile leadership wherever we work. I'll focus on some of the things that I've done personally across different countries: India, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and in the United States. What I've been able to achieve following the principles of agile leadership in some form or shape. One very important recommended video for this particular module in Agile Leadership is that you can watch on YouTube is named as Evolution of Leadership Styles. It's by Harvard Business Review, and it's a very good watch that I would strongly recommend for you to watch so that you understand how leadership evolved from a very command control driven kind of leadership towards focus on human relations as a result of Hawthorne studies, and then the evolution towards being transformational and towards what we are discussing today, which is agile leadership. Because we have to face a very uncertain, volatile, and ambiguous world. Agile leadership is something that will get you there, will ensure that your organization continues to be successful. We ensure that we have that competitive advantage. We are sustainable and more resilient in face of adversity. Now, we just began this whole module by talking about the VUCA world: volatility, uncertainty, and also the kind of effects that we have in a very unpredictable world, and in the face of adversity, ambiguity. So volatility, how markets fluctuate, whether it's stock markets, whether it's demand and supply, and what kind of fluctuations do we see in the marketplace. That's volatility for you. Technology disruptions, stuff that you thought were technology breakthroughs, are no longer technology breakthroughs in 6 months' time. Classical example of volatility is what COVID-19 did on organizations. Like remote work became that much more in practice. Employees stopped coming to work, and organizations did not need large office spaces as employees continue to work remote. Volatility, I mean, COVID-19 showed us how crazy business can be during COVID stuff, and nobody could predict something like that would happen to businesses. Uncertainty, unpredictable events happen at the business place, changing regulations by each country, by each region. Example, Brexit, the impact on business complexity. You might have stuff going on in terms of the impact of Brexit even today, and it has far-reaching effect on the European Union and across the globe as well. Complexity, you talk about global interconnections, multiple stakeholders are there right now that you are servicing, and supply chain challenges. We all are aware how much we are affected by increased prices, both in the customer consumer market as well as the production manufacturing market. Supply chain challenges continue to disrupt, manufacturing, disrupt a lot of industries, and affect adversely economies. So, complex world we live in, caused by global interconnection, something that happens in China has an impact on us in terms of supply chain, for example. We have multiple stakeholders. And as I talk about, supply chain and our dependence on, say, countries like China, uh, the latest last quarter, Apple shipped about $6 billion worth Apple phones from India. So obviously, Apple is looking at other locations for manufacturing Apple products because we want to make sure that too much of over dependence on a specific supply chain can adversely affect and make it extremely complex for business sustainability and resilience. Ambiguity, you have unclear cause and effect. Multiple interpretations can happen, say stuff like cryptocurrency market dynamics and how the markets will change in face of AI and machine learning. We are not 100% aware of it. So there's plenty of ambiguity in every industry of the integration of AI, machine learning, integration of, say, fintech and cryptocurrency. These could be pretty disruptive in the future, and we face a very ambiguous future. And that's what we talk about the VUCA world, where volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity are key. And you have to pay attention to focusing on these as an agile leader and lead your organization in ways that you can overcome these things and you can stem the adverse effect of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity to a certain extent. A recommended video, Leading in a VUCA World, McKinsey and Company on YouTube is a great read, a great watch. You should watch it, and I strongly recommend you watching that to have a better sense of the kind of business world that we operate in. I would like to present a case study here as a classical example of agile leadership. It's Adobe's transformation. 2012, they had a very traditional software sales model. And what happened with Adobe when they had that kind of traditional software sales model was their revenues were declining, market disruptions were creating a big problem for them. And as a result, they had agile leadership response in the form of CEO Shantanu Narayan's vision. They shifted to creative cloud subscription model, and the results were phenomenal. They had a revenue growth of $4 billion from $4 billion in 2012 to $17 billion plus in 2023. Their employees were far more satisfied because of the kind of shift and the vision that an agile leader like Shantanu Narayan displayed. Employee satisfaction increased, market leadership in creative software, and the key lessons that they continue to be customer centric. They had iterative implementation of changes that they wanted to do, and that's a classical example of agile leadership having a very transformative effect at Adobe. Recommended videos, I would strongly recommend for you to watch Adobe's digital transformation. This is again on YouTube. There's again another wonderful video that you should watch. It's called Leadership Style Assessment um, by Mind Tools, and this is again available on YouTube. These are the two videos that I would strongly recommend for you to understand the elements of digital transformation and also leadership style assessment, and also relate to this particular case study of Adobe, where Shantanu Narayan actually had a visionary leadership and a change in focus, change in tactics, creating a culture that was strongly supportive of change, and to be able to think outside the box and then reverse the kind of declining revenue and have an increase in revenue growth, greater employee satisfaction, greater clientele satisfaction, and greater resilience and sustainability. Now, if you were to be an agile leader, I have a list of things that you can possibly think of practicing. Again, this is not the exhaustive list. It's not a recipe for everyone that you have to pick only from this list. You could add some to this list as if you choose to. But these are wonderful practices, the term that we use in business called best practices, benchmarking practices, if you might want to call it that. And I think these are wonderful starting points for you to practice as an agile leader if you want to create the same level of transformative change within your organization. So the daily practices include a morning team huddle. So having those periodic meetings, like how sporting teams have a morning team huddle to understand what they want to accomplish each month, each week, or every single day, I think that's a key for you to regroup, understand, reiterate the values that you live for, also reiterate and reinforce the collaborative spirit that exists, and also reiterate and refocus on team goals that have to be achieved. Now, that has to be followed up with regular feedback sessions. Any person out there who has been given a goal to achieve, any team that has been given a goal to achieve, requires regular feedback to understand if they are on track, if they are doing the right thing, and if they are not doing the right thing, how do they actually change their strategy? How do they procure or secure resources that will help them achieve the goal? If they need additional members, how do they ensure that they get the support of additional members? If they need some communication help so that they can talk to other teams outside their own team in terms of getting their support to achieving their targets and goals, that those things are possible when you have those regular feedback sessions. Retrospective assessment methods could be used, like a 360-degree feedback. So for me, for example, I would have feedback from my students, feedback from my colleagues, feedback from my dean, a 360-degree feedback, maybe feedback from the business executive council, the advisory board members, to tell me if what I'm doing as an individual or teams that I'm leading, are we doing it right? Taking these constructive ideas, using the 360-degree feedback, which should be periodic, can only help us understand better what our stakeholders expect from us. And if we are doing something really good, we continue to do that. And if there are areas that we could possibly improve on, those are the stuff that we can refocus on based on the feedback we get from the 360-degree feedback method that can be used. If you're also an agile leader, you could do a team velocity metrics to figure out how quick you are as a team in identifying opportunities, in securing resources, in creating strategies to achieve identified objectives, in making sure you have the metrics to measure progress, to also recalibrate the team progress and to ensure goals are achieved on time. Another very important aspect we have talked all through today's discussion is customer satisfaction. So a leadership dashboard could be developed in the organization to secure feedback from employees, to secure feedback from clientele and customers, and also other stakeholders within the organization and external to the organization, to figure out if we are on target. As an agile leader, you have to create a team charter, and it's not about individuals alone in organizations. It's about a team charter. Have a clear communication plan for everything that you do. Have a clear policy based on ethical practices, based on ensuring diversity, inclusion, equity. You want to make sure policies are fair and just, and that employees feel that they've got a good deal in terms of ethical ways of looking at things, in terms of decisions and actions that are based on equity, inclusion, and appreciation of diversity, that the underrepresented groups are properly represented. I think these are important daily practices that you keep at the back of your mind if you want to be a good, successful, agile leader. But there's a recommended video at this on this topic of implementation tools if you want to practice being a good agile leader. It's called Agile Leadership Tools. It's available by Scrum Alliance on YouTube. I would strongly recommend that you watch this so you have a better understanding. Again, as I said, these practices are not an exhaustive list. You can always go back to add stuff that might work for you as an agile leader. or that could work in specific for your company or your business, and for your teams that you actually lead. You could add certain practices from your own experiences and from what you have observed in the past. You could add some more to the list. But this is a great starting point for you to think about how you can practice agile leadership and ensure that you make the best use of agile leadership for your teams, for your organization, and to serve your stakeholders better. Now, common challenges if you want to be an agile leader, what kind of challenges would you face in organizations? One is definitely resistance to change. If you have organizations that have a culture that is very strong and that's pretty negative and that's debilitating, and they have a strong resistance to change, that could be a serious challenge. So when you go to an organization, you accept a position, I think the first most important thing for you as a leader is to be able to observe. You got to observe practices, values, assumptions, beliefs, artifacts, practices. You got to observe as a leader, because if you observe really well, you could possibly orient all employees in ways that will make them less resistant to change. You cannot straight away go and start implementing your vision if you have not taken enough time to observe everything that's going on, of activities, of people, of their practices, the values, the beliefs, their inclinations, their skills and competences, their motives, their interests. You got to observe first. Then the second step is to be able to orient them properly. If you can bring commonality in people's inclinations, if you can bring in complementary skilled people together to form the right set of teams, and if you can orient them towards organizational goals, team goals, the strategic goals of the organization, which align with your vision that you bring as a leader. That's the orientation part of it. So you got to take enough time to observe. You've got to make your observations. You understand people, spend time talking to them so that you orient them towards the strategic goals of your organization or your team or your group, and make sure they have lesser resistance to change when you decide certain things. It's observe, orient, you take decisions, and you have to then take action. The incremental implementation is the action part of it. And before you come straight to incremental implementation, the first three steps are observe, orient, decide, and then implement or action. A classical example is IBM's cultural transformation. It's important that IBM's leadership saw and understood, observed values, beliefs, practices, and the inclinations and motivation of employees. They understood, the leadership understood the requirements of customers and stakeholder expectations, made the kind of cultural changes and transformation. And for them now, it was much easier to have an incremental implementation of things outside the box that are creative, that are collaborative, that are value addition to customers. IBM was very successful because they had that kind of cultural transformation and they overcame resistance to change. The second challenge that you might face as an agile leader is maintaining consistency. So it's very important that you practice consistency in terms of how you appreciate ethical decision making, fair business practices, openness and consistency in transparency. I think those are very important for employees to have the kind of trust and confidence in your leadership. Also, clear principles and guardrails towards when you take actions, towards when you take decisions. You got to be clear about what you want, how you want these things to be achieved, and what are the guardrails, what are the stuff that employees or team members should be careful about of not overstepping as they try to achieve those key results or objectives. A classical example is Google's OKR system. It's focused on objectives and key results, but they're very ambitious as teams. They have strong goals that are being set forth for them, but they also have measurables. Key results are clearly created, but there are qualitative aspects as well which are discussed. And when these objectives that are measurable, that are clearly defined with qualitative elements, they're aligned to the team towards a shared goal and strategy, which are enshrined in terms of vision, in terms of values that are like guardrails. So Google's framework of objectives and key results is a great example of maintaining consistency. So whatever everybody does in the organization, they're driven by the OKR system at Google. So they're not disconnected, they're not going in different directions. They're one set of coherent effort in terms of time and energy that is spent towards achieving something. The third challenge sometimes can be measuring success. Now, how if you don't measure success, you wouldn't know when people talk that they've been doing great things, but you want to measure what were the outcomes. So measuring success sometimes could be a challenge. There are qualitative measures, there are quantitative measures, there are impact measures. So qualitative measures are when customers say they were very happy, they give you testimonials. And that's great. You have they're being satisfied, they feel good about your product or service. These are qualitative measures. Quantitative measures could be in result in terms of sales, in terms of increased number of customers, in terms of retained the number of retained customers, customer loyalty measures. You could do a lot of surveys, get more data from market, and you have quantitative measures. And then you have impact measures in terms of what kind of impact have you created on society? What kind of impact have you created with your products and services on communities that you operate with? What kind of impact have you created for the planet and its people? What kind of impact have you created that governments are interested in you? Other stakeholders are now interested in partnering with you because you've created that kind of strong positive impact. So measuring success acts as a big reinforcement for all that a leader brings as part of the vision, and it also reinforces the efforts of team members, employees, and every stakeholder who is engaged towards making that vision a success. The same example that we talked about, Spotify's health check model, is a classical example of to figure out what are the squads doing, what are the tribes doing, how are they getting the work done, how are we measuring their success, how do we check are they happy as employees, are they happy as teams, and are customers and clients happy that actually consume Spotify services. So resistance to change should be managed with solutions that are based on observation, orientation, decisions, and incremental implementation. Maintaining consistency is clear, very important. Clear principles, guardrails have to be defined so that employees, teams, everybody understands that they have to achieve something. Success has to be measured from time to time. Again, balanced scorecard approach can be a very good way of measuring success. Kaplan and Norton proposed the balanced scorecard approach, where you actually measure financial results, you measure innovation and process results, you also measure, kind of research results, customer satisfaction results, employee satisfaction results. You're looking at a balanced way of looking at all stakeholder credentials and measurables, and you're measuring how far have we come towards balancing out financial accomplishments, customer satisfaction, supporting process improvement, supporting innovation within the organization, and ensuring that we are able to beat competition, stay sustainable, and stay resilient. So, balanced scorecard approach is looking at input and data from different stakeholders, from different perspectives, and we want to measure success so that we are sure whatever vision we bring as an agile leader that we are able to achieve it, measure impact, measure success, looking at every stakeholder's perspective. That's extremely important. Now you have at this particular slide, I'm happy to share additional resources that you might want to look at. Turn the Ship Around, written by David Marquardt. It's a good reading for you. You should be able to read that. Leading in a VUCA world by various authors. Online courses are available. Agile Alliance and Scrum Alliance are some examples of those sources. I would strongly recommend that you would have time to read some of the additional resources that are there available on the internet as well, apart from watching all the YouTube videos that I've suggested in each of the slides that were discussed. Thank you.